This is Tokens. I'm Lee C. Camp. Yale theologian Miroslav Volf is Croatian by birth. When his father was a young man, he was forced into a labor camp and placed on a death march.
Marching about 30 miles a day on 200 calories with the purpose of killing as many of them who were marching as possible and then turn the remainder into inmates. And he was absolutely furious the entire time. He was in hell, experiencing hell around him.
And this prompted Miroslav's father to ask profound existential questions. He would, in a bizarre way, find a loving God in the midst of such a hell. In time, when Miroslav faced great suffering of his own, he was driven by a similar question.
Can you find joy in hell? Can you find love in hell?
Our interview with award-winning author and world-renowned professor of theology, Miroslav Volf, on what real joy is, coming right up. And a special segment on the show today when our resident funny man brother preacher insists on being included in the dialogue with Professor Volf. Welcome. Please welcome from Yale, Professor Miroslav Volf. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you back. What, eight years later? Yeah, we have you back.
Well,
yeah.
Seven,
8, yeah. Somewhere in there, yes. Well, welcome back. We're delighted to have you. I heard you this summer at Yale talk about the ways in which you pointed to this great tradition in which we have these theologies of trying to construe the whole of Christian thought, for example, under a theology of love, or construe the whole of theology under a theology of peace. Well, we've had very few people who have tried to construe Christian life under the rubric of a theology of joy. Talk to us a little bit about that.
I am glad that you picked up love and peace and then joy rather than what you said at the very, very beginning, kind of theology of grumpiness.
Yeah.
It seems so, yeah. So the great theologies of the past were organized either around the issue of love or around peace, and very few have been organized around joy. And it's surprising, though, when you look sometimes at the experience of the churches and of Christians, they're kind of grumpy people toiling along towards some kind of hope for happiness. But if you look carefully at the liturgies of the church, if you look carefully also, especially at the New Testament texts, they're full of joy. If you look at the Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, full of joy. And I think it's time to retrieve joy as something fundamental, not just to Christian life, but also fundamental to human existence. I mentioned biblical text. One of them is the Gospel of Luke. And the Gospel of Luke is framed by joy. At the very beginning of the Gospel, when birth of Christ is announced, it's kind of full of joy. Trumpets are sounding. At the very end, when Jesus is returning back, the disciples run away full of joy, right? And in the middle, there's this wonderful chapter 15, which is about finding of the lost things. And it's again full of joy. So you can say that the beginning and the end and in the middle, Christian faith can be construed as being really about joy.
But you're not describing, I suppose, mere kind of happyology.
Yeah, I have nothing against being happy, right? But maybe there's something more than being happy, at least in the way in which we tend to think of happiness. Happiness tends for us today to be mere a kind of feeling of pleasure, feeling all right in this moment, or maybe even exuberant in this moment. I think that joy has something deeper to it. It's not a mere feeling. It's a kind of emotion that encompasses a sense that there's something good about the situation in which I find myself, and it has its own depth. And sometimes I've compared happiness, mere happiness as feeling, and joy to bubbly water. To thinking, for instance, of champagne. If you think of champagne as a bubbly water, you miss something absolutely fundamentally important about champagne. It has bubbles, right? And there's happiness is part of that. But you miss the smell of it, you miss the kind of intoxicated character of it, you miss the celebratory mood that always surrounds it. And I think there's something to that depth to joy when we properly understand what joy means.
It's like you Episcopalians to go to Champagne.
Well, I became Episcopalian for the sake of wine. That's very simple. When people ask me, why did you become Episcopalian? I said, it's because of wine. Because when I was in some of those Protestant churches, they got me drinking for communion, they got me drinking grape juice out of shot glasses. And I said, my God, I love shot glasses, but I don't like to put grape juice in them, and I don't like to drink them in church. Find me the church where I can drink wine out of common cup. And then they said, you've got to go to Episcopalians. Immediately, I turned to be Episcopalian.
Yesterday, you introduced me to a Jewish tradition that teaches that we should always seek to, as I understood you, always seek to lament alongside our joy. I went back to my office, and actually I have a board in my office from a George Herbert poem, an English poet, a little after Shakespeare, I suppose, and he has this beautiful poem called Bittersweet. He says, ah, my dear angry Lord, since thou dost love and strike, cast down, but help afford, sure, I will do the like. I will complain and praise, I will bewail, approve, and all my sour, sweet days I will lament and love. So I heard echoes of Herbert in you talking about this sort of notion of lamenting alongside joy. Talk to us a little bit about what that practice might look like or what that might mean.
Absolutely beautiful, what you've recited. Yeah, and I think that's one of the differences, as I see it, between mere happiness. I say mere, it's good, mere happiness and joy. And that is that in joy there can be simultaneity of sorrow. There can be simultaneity of joy and lament. We all experience that when we go to a funeral of a dear friend. There's a kind of celebration of life, and yet there's a lament because a friend has departed. And I think when we think about joy, we can rejoice over some things, but at the same time lament other things. And indeed, I think a joy to be somehow true to the state of the world, to my state, has to keep in mind that there is sorrow to be had, and that there are others who are sorrowful right at the moment when I am rejoicing, and that my joy would somehow be false if it was forgetful of their sorrow. And so a light reminder that everything isn't that moment of joy that I'm experiencing is really important to the integrity of the joy itself.
You shared with me Sunday evening that your own father came to faith in the midst of a forced labor camp at the end of World War II. Oh, can you describe that? And which, in terms of what you're talking about, coming to faith for him also meant coming to joy and a flourishing life. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, when my dad was an 18-year-old kid who, by mistake, ended up first on a death march for about a month and a half, marching about 30 miles a day on 200 calories, with the purpose of killing as many of them who were marching as possible, and then turn the remainder into labor camp inmates. And he was, because it was a mistake, he was absolutely furious the entire time. He was in hell, experiencing hell around him, and there was a hell inside him in his own soul. And as he told the story about it, and always the question was, at the end of it, he's finding God right there in this camp. And then my question always was, can you find joy in hell? Can you find love in hell? And he did. And he did because there's some guy who... He was a little bit weirdo guy, tall, his limbs going every which direction, not quite fully himself, at one with himself, and yet some kind of inner beauty of his soul was there, who was talking to my father in the midst of this hell about God being love. And my father was furious at the idea that God, who is up there sitting finally on his hands, doing nothing, can be described as love when he is undergoing this incredible suffering. And I won't go into details, but in an inexplicable way to him and to me, he was in the midst of that, gripped with the reality of God's love, that God is love. He kind of relented to the idea that God is love. And I think this was almost kind of a rebellion against the world in which he was caught. It was affirmation from the depths of his soul that there is primacy to the goodness, primacy to love over whatever hatred has been boiling in his soul as a reaction to experiences, negative experiences that he has had. And for me, that became always a symbol how, in the worst possible circumstances, the best can emerge. In every swamp, there's a potential for a lily to grow.
How does expectations fit into our notion of joy, experience of joy?
Joy gets spoiled by false expectations, by inability to stay with the good that is before us because we have imagined a good to look different than what we in fact experience. A kind of attentiveness to that which is and which can be seen and experienced as good. I think that's a really important part of joy. And I think the other side of it also, the kind of sadness, or if you want, the negativity of life that's being articulated, is a very important thing, part of joy. I was recently in Austin. I was talking to a woman who works in a cancer ward, and she told me that on Ash Wednesday, there's a line starting at 3 o'clock in the morning and lasts all the way to 11 o'clock in the evening of cancer patients wanting to have ashes imposed upon them. And what you say is, know, man, that you are dust, and into dust you will return. I mean, there's kind of a naming of the reality of who we are and participating in that reality, who we are. And that's the kind of sadness side, the named negative side. And I think we can properly rejoice when we take into account that that's what life as we experience it also is. If we don't have it, we have a false expectation and joy eludes us.
Of course, your work from very early on has been very serious about taking social conditions of some the most horrific sort very, very seriously, the Yugoslav war in your homeland. Or recently, you've talked some in one of your books and some of your lectures about your own experience of being in the Yugoslav army, drafted, mandatory sentence, mandatory requirement. But you've in effect suggested that it was something of a year-long experience of something like psychological torture. Is that a correct sort of way to frame what you went through?
Yeah, maybe a year is too much, but about 3 months. And basically I was drafted into the army. At that time I've been into the United States, I've been into Germany, I've been writing doctoral dissertation on Karl Marx, and that was really subversive, right? Because as a theologian, I'm going to write something that the state will not like. I was married to an American, and obviously I was working for CIA. And so when I was drafted into the Yugoslavian army, and this is a mandatory thing, then the whole unit was organized around spying on me for about 3 months or so. There's a big staple of all transcripts of what I've said and what I've done, and pictures what I've done. And then started the interrogations with serious threats, not really physical torture, but psychological torture in terms of what could happen to me if in some of these things that I've said, they discover some whiff of the anti-state activity. And for me, then the big question at the time, but also later, was not just how do I experience this, but how do I remember that, so that the bitterness doesn't grow, so that resentment doesn't grow, so that the possibility of different future, or the possibility even of reconciliation with those who have inflicted this upon me, is not forestalled. I knew that I couldn't initiate it simply and make it happen myself, but I knew that I could prepare the soil in my soul so that actual repair, both of my own life and of the relationships, could happen.
It's a counterintuitive notion, perhaps, for some of us early on to think about memory. I hear you describing memory not as a simple apparatus that recollects facts, but as a sort of art that you try to remember correctly. You want it concerned with factual truth as well as possible, right. But there's a particular art maybe to the way in which we recollect?
Yeah, because there is pragmatics of memory. It doesn't just register things, but registers it with certain intentionality, registers it as something happening to me. And this remembering, you have it in philosophical tradition, obviously people speak about seeing something as. But if you see something as, you can see something in a very different ways. You can experience something as a threat, or you can experience something as a kind of gesture of jest toward you, and it depends on a situation, though action might be exactly the same. We let memories do things to us, and we do things with memories to others. And this pragmatics of memory, I think, is a very important kind of discipline of the soul in order to nurture pragmatics of memory so that which has happened to me doesn't end up as a wound in myself and doesn't transpose itself into me tomorrow wounding somebody else.
And you're reflecting on forgiveness. Do you carry about any particular pictures of heroes of forgiveness for yourself?
Well, my hero of forgiveness are both my mother and my father. My older brother was 5 years old, I was 1, was killed by the negligence of a soldier of Yugoslav army. That's that same army which had put my dad through death march and in labor camp. And kind of forgiveness that my parents, independently of each other, gave to this person. And basically, each of them said to themselves, almost parallel without consulting, they remembered this verse from the New Testament: forgive as you have been forgiven, as God has forgiven you in Christ. And that became a paradigm of relating to that soldiers. And I think what's even more important for me is I had a nanny at that time, and she was supposed to take care of Daniel. Daniel went out and played with the soldiers and got killed. And I thought then later, well, if I was a parent in my mother's place, the first person I would blame was that careless nanny. And obviously there was something like that going on, but she remained our nanny. And she was an angel of my childhood. She's totally fantastically saintly woman. Until 25 years ago, my mother never mentioned once to me the blame that was to be ascribed to my nanny, because she, in a sense, wanted to preserve the beauty of this woman in my eyes. First book I ever written, I've dedicated to my nanny rather than to my mother. Even then my mother didn't say, but you know what she did and who she was, how can you, and so forth. There was this kind of beautiful forgiveness that protected the reputation even of that woman, even though this was obviously a mistake, a serious mistake that she has made.
Miroslav Volf, thank you very much for being with us tonight. Thank you. You are listening to Tokens, Public Theology, Human Flourishing, The Good Life. This is our episode with Professor Miroslav Volf from Yale Divinity School. We're pleased to announce that we have released an online course with Miroslav Volf, beautifully crafted, edited for you to study and listen in the comfort of your very own home. Volf has been called by Rowan Williams, Archbishop of Canterbury, one of the most celebrated theologians of our day. And now, yes, even now, you can take an online course with him. Visit www.tokenshow.com/courses and use the coupon code VOLF50 for 50% off. That's VOLF50 for 50% off. It is a great course, and we would love for you to join us there for that. Coming up, Brother Preacher sits in for a special segment with Professor Volf. You are listening to Tokens, and if you have not yet been to one of our live token shows, well, why not? And if you have not yet been to one of our live token shows, then you might not know that we quite often dabble in a bit of satire. And when Miroslav Volf was last with us, the king of such potentially offensive rhetorical skills Brother Preacher insisted on a sit-down with Professor Miroslav Volf. Enjoy. We're delighted to welcome back Professor Miroslav Volf. Please welcome Miroslav back with us here. It's great to have you here in Nashville this week. Last several days, coming down from New Haven to be with us here in Music City.
And you have rain for me?
Yeah, I had some rain for you too.
Better than snow.
Indeed.
Snowing up there, so it's cool.
Sorry I'm late.
This is clearly a mistake here.
Lee, this is an intervention of the Bald Preacher Society. The good news is you've been accepted into the club. The bad news is I have my razor on me, okay?
Yeah.
Listen, while I got you here, Miroslav, I just want to... Miroslav. Manilo. What is it? Tell me what it is. What is it? Miroslav, okay. I'm pretty sure it's Manislav. Well, whatever. Okay. Agree to disagree on that one. Listen. I am so glad you are here tonight because I have to say you have one of the most beautiful heads of nothing I have ever seen. I mean, that is Yul Brynner / Elisha quality baldness, am I right? I mean, that thing is smoother than the Sea of Galilee after the Lord got done with it, amen? I would gladly sick 2 she-bears on a bunch of mouthy teenagers just to look like that, I really would. What is your secret to that thing?
Secret.
Well, I was hoping something better than that, I have to say. You want to know what I do? Once a week, I go down to the airport to that scanner and security. I stand like that for about 45 minutes. They make you sweep after, make everything. But I'll tell you, it works like a charm. It really does.
Do you mind if we get started now?
Oh, I'd love to. Waiting on you. Let's do it.
All right. Since we're lucky to have a true scholar with us tonight, as well as Brother Preacher, we thought it'd be fun to take a few questions from the audience. New segment entitled Ask a Scholar, Ask a Preacher.
Okay, and which one am I again?
Yeah.
I'm kidding. I don't know anything about the Bible. I'm a preacher. That did not come out the way I meant it to. I'm sorry.
Amen. You're definitely no scholar. All right,
okay,
here's the first question.
Let's do it.
It's for both of you. From one of the youngsters in our audience here tonight.
Oh.
What is your favorite book of the Bible? Miroslav, your favorite book of the Bible?
Book of Job.
Book of Job. Wow. All right. BP, what's your favorite?
Well, this one's easy for me. My favorite book of the Bible, hands down, 3 John. Why? Only 14 verses in the whole blooming book, okay? I love anything I can read 2 or 3 times while I'm waiting for a latte. I love that. My second favorite book is probably Song of Solomon. That is a great book. Lousy song, but a great book. My least favorite book has got to be Hezekiah.
What?
Well, I just feel that Hezekiah is the poor man's Zephaniah. You know what I mean? It's no Obadiah, if you know what I'm talking about. I would go Jeremiah or Nehemiah long before I go Hezekiah. But the good news is, it's all in the Old Testament, and I can never find any of them books. So once again, all things work together for good.
Are you okay? Are you through? All right,
I'm finished.
Come on, next question. All right. All right. This one's going to be tough for one of you anyway.
Okay.
What do each of you admire about the other's preaching?
Oh, okay.
Miroslav, this is very hard for me to even get my mouth around. Miroslav Volf, what do you most admire about Brother Preacher's preaching? Good luck to you.
And if you would, look me in the eye when you do that. Go ahead. Take your time.
My brain's completely empty when preacher looks at me, right? Those eyes. I mean, typical, really, preacher, right? Looks you in the eyes and you're mesmerized, and pretty soon you're on the altar call. Comes altar call, and you are slain in the spirit.
Okay.
Wow.
BP.
That might be the best thing I've ever heard anyone say about my preaching.
Yes.
I really should probably get you to do the forward for my new book,
Absolutely.
Snappy Stories That Preachers Tell. It's like a pamphlet, doesn't take that long to read. Unless you read it slow, then it's huge.
Okay, BP. What do you most admire about Miroslav's style of...
Listen, this is easy. This is easy for me. And I know I speak for every preacher in this room tonight, okay? When we hear Miroslav preach, we are impressed, we are challenged, and we have absolutely no idea what you are talking about. And I mean that in a good way. I mean, when you... Right? When you preach, you bring what I like to call scholarship. Are you familiar with that word?
No, never heard.
Smarty pantsness is another way to do it.
I've heard that.
Okay. Which is not how I preach, at all, okay? I mean, I don't even like to read, you want to know the truth. One time I tried to read Leviticus, or as I like to call it, God's melatonin. I lasted about 4 minutes in that thing. That was one of the most boring cookbooks I've ever read in my life. But I'm a preacher. I don't want to sit around and read. I want to get up there and preach, whether I know what I'm talking about or not. Because the way I look at it, I am not getting paid to sit around and read. I'm getting paid to preach and bring in the mail and lock up the building. And that's what I intend to do.
Yes!
But now I will say this. When I preach, like you, nobody knows what I'm talking about either. Which is why I feel a real simpatico with you, or maybe capellini might be a better word. I don't know what either of those words mean. I know I'm getting hungry. I know that. We should go out for Italian sometime.
No, don't do it, Miroslav. Okay, next. Okay. How do you deal with critics of your work?
Well, I either disregard them or I write responses to them. Trash them.
Yeah.
No.
I'm liking you more by the second.
Okay, BP, I know you have some experience in this area.
Well, a little
How
bit.
do you deal with those who sincerely hate and despise the way you preach?
Well, I'm glad you rephrased the question for me. That helped a lot. Thank you. Now I know what you're talking about. Listen, it is no surprise to anybody in this room that occasionally I have been known to rub people the wrong way. And by occasionally, I mean, every time I put on pants and leave the house. But the good news is, I don't know I'm being offensive until it's too late. I mean, I can read a room like a dyslexic duck. I can feel the pulse of a crowd like a candy striper on their first day of work, No idea what I'm supposed to be doing. And yet when I get it, when I realize that I've been, fired or disfellowshipped or whatever, then the Lord comes and wraps me in a divine coat of apathy, or who cares, that lasts for about 10 minutes. Then I get up, I make a sandwich, and then I forget the whole thing. And what a blessing that is.
You're ridiculous. All right.
Thank you.
Next question. I'm a young ministry student here. What kind of training did you each receive for your profession? Miroslav?
I had about 16 years of education, schooling. Two PhDs.
Oh. BP, the world awaits.
Yeah.
At long last, please tell us, what kind of training do you have?
I have been trained. I have been trained and trained. I've been so trained I could probably drive a train by now. Sometimes I think I've probably been overtrained. You want to know the truth? Okay? Because I just think about my training. I can't believe I get so much training in there because I've been so trained. You know what I mean? And so what if I can't remember right now where I was trained? Or when or by who? Because I know I had to have been trained. They're not going to let just any dummy stand up in the pulpit and preach. Well, okay, bad example. What I'm saying is what I've said for years. A preacher doesn't need to be trained. A preacher doesn't need to even be smart. The only thing a preacher needs to be is done by lunchtime on Sunday. Or as I like to call it, the Cracker Barrel cutoff time. If you've got a preacher who does not respect the Cracker Barrel cutoff time, guess what? You're going to be down at Cracker Barrel in that pretend general store, eating old lady candy and buying CDs from a machine that you gave away 9 years ago, and then rocking in them big dumb rocking chairs with a big chain on it. Who is stealing rocking chairs from Cracker Barrel? More importantly, who is buying rocking chairs from Cracker Barrel? How does that even work? You know what I mean? What I need today, what's that? Some eggs and some rocking chairs. Oh, I know where we can go. Manitoba, your thoughts?
Thank you. Ask a preacher.
Oh, that's
ask
it.
a
Oh, we're out of
scholar.
time.
Yeah.
We're out of time.
You've been listening to Tokens, Public Theology, Human Flourishing, The Good Life. Thanks for joining us. Please remember to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and please remember to refer us to a fellow podcast listener. Do us a special favor, share some of your favorite episode links on Facebook or other social media outlets, and let folks know about our project here. Remember, too, that you can take a Tokens online course with Professor Miroslav Volf. Just visit www.tokenshow.com/courses and use coupon code VOLF50, that's VOLF50, at checkout for 50% off. Feedback, we would love to hear from you. Email us, text, or attach a voice memo and send to the address podcast@tokensshow.com. Our thanks to all the stellar team that makes this podcast possible. Executive producer and manager Christy Bragg of Bragg Management, co-producer Jacob Lewis of Great Feeling Studios, associate producer Leslie Thompson of Rogue Creative Marketing and Media, associate producer Ashley Bain, our engineer Carriot Harmon, production assistant Kara Fox, and our live event production team at Stonebrook Media, all led by Phil Barnett. Thanks for listening, and peace be unto thee. The Tokens Podcast is a production of Tokens Media, LLC, and Great Feeling Studios, both in Nashville, Tennessee.